Does credit also go to the surge? Does the president now believe that President Bush made the right decision to order that surge in troops in Iraq?
Again, George, I think the president has always stated and always believed that our security would be, that adding 30,000 troops into Iraq would improve the security. But obviously the leaders in Iraq had to make some political accommodation to move that country forward.
President Obama set to have an Oval Office address on Iraq, and his spokesman Robert Gibbs doing a little dancing for him in the pregame.
That's right. Top Line starts right now.
Hello and welcome to ABC News Washington Post Top Line. I'm Rick Klein.
And I'm Amy Walter.
Every day at noon Eastern, right here bringing you the latest in politics, everything you need to know before you head out the door to lunch. It's twitter.com/Rick Klein and twitter.com/Amy E. Walter. Amy, big day, Oval Office address.
Big day. There's a lot going on in the Oval Office. The first thing we're going to address is the out of Iraq, the speech tonight the president's going to make live from the Oval Office, where, of course, he is going to talk about the drawdown of U.S. combat forces. But, of course, the economy's not going to be far away from his mind either. I'll be curious to see the percentage of time he spends talking about rebuilding at home.
Well, that's an interesting point. A lot of Democrats would much rather see presidential attention staying on the economy like it was for a brief period yesterday. This, of course, marks the end of the combat operations in Iraq. They've got to be careful on that front, and also, as you say, to show the American people that they're caring about other things other than Iraq, which is not something that's a top issue right now for voters. Next up, generically glum. Take a look at these numbers. This is the latest from the Gallup poll, and this is an extraordinary edge, a 10-point edge in the generic ballot for Republicans among likely voters, 51-41. That is the most in the history of the poll, and you can just see the divergence of those two lines over the last several months. It is just a terrible warning sign for Democrats, and it is the latest sign, and all the signals have been in the same direction, Amy, that this is likely to be a big election, and big in really one direction. Right,
and these are registered voters, which we know historically that number is better for Democrats. So if we say among likely voters, that number could be even bigger. This is not just a wave. This could be a tsunami coming. All right, redecoration nation. I talked about the Oval Office a little bit earlier. The White House Oval Office went to a makeover. Here we have the home television network here. New look in the White House. Maybe a good thing here for the Oval Office, but the timing not so great.
I don't get that at all. I don't think it has an eye at all on political timing. And I'm no decorator, but that looked like a Pottery Barn set there for me for a second there. The earth color tones, those very comfortable couches.
So swing voters are very attuned to the Pottery Barn demographic.
There you go. I think we've got an explanation finally. And finally today, Young Gunning. Take a look at these three hot young Republicans. They've got a book coming out next month, and it got us thinking about some other young guns. But take a look at this. This is the video that they put together in advance of the book.
The new team is ready to bring America back. Eric Cantor, Kevin McCarthy, Paul Ryan.
I like these odds. Young guns.
Oh, that last piece was our creativity. That's not in the original video, but these three, Cantor, McCarthy, Ryan, they've got the book coming out. They're taking kind of a leadership role and putting forward some Republican messaging and, of course, some faces.
Right, and Emilio Estevez did brilliant after that Young Guns movie, so they can only hope that their success continues on that trajectory.
It's exactly on that course.
That's right.
Well, we begin today with some dueling pollsters. We're joined by Anna Greenberg, a Democratic pollster, and Glen, a Republican pollster. And I want to start with you, Anna, because these are just startling numbers for a lot of Democrats, this gap in the generic ballot. What does that mean to Democrats, and what can you do to try to combat that in these last 2 months?
They're challenging numbers. There's no way to spin it. And I think that we've all known it was going to be a challenging year. And as the economy appears to stall and the news about the economy is increasingly negative, it's not that big a surprise to me that the numbers have gotten a little bit worse. A couple things I would say, again, not trying to spin or rationalize away these numbers, but the generic congressional is different than the named congressional. In other words, when you actually put the name of a member of Congress and their opponent into a race, the numbers actually tighten. And we've got some, individual races that, generically, if you look at political measures like the McCain vote, look really challenging. But when you actually look at the dynamics of that race, whether it's that you've got a big fundraising difference between the Democrat and Republican, or a third-party candidate, or an individually popular person, some of those races look less challenging. So I think the generic number probably overstates a little bit how bad it's going to be.
Well, Glenn, you have a knowing grin right now. These are numbers that you looked at. Yeah, been there, done that. 2006.
we're hearing a lot of the same thing from Republicans about, there's an opportunity to talk individual districts, all politics is local. Tell me what you are seeing on the ground about this, all trying to maybe localize these elections from the Democrat perspective to overcome the national problems.
Amy, if you look at the 3 M's of politics, money, yes, the Democrats clearly have that advantage, but where they're lacking is message and motivation. Republican voters are fired up. As was noted, the 10-point lead is among registered voters, among likely voters. We're seeing even better numbers for Republicans. And then in terms of message, that's one of the challenges is when the mood is against you, when your president has a poor approval rating, or a weak approval rating, things that you say in a campaign to attack your Republican opponent, or in 2006, the Democratic opponent, don't resonate. Voters say, I've heard that, you're in charge, I don't like what's going on, doesn't matter what you say. There are going to be some individual cases, some individual campaigns where Democrats do survive. But the wave is building, and the only question is how high is it? Is it 40 seats? Is it 50 seats?
It won't be 435-0, I think, in the next House of Representatives. That's fair. And I want to ask about the news today that we're seeing with the president talking about Iraq and having this speech in the Oval Office. How are Democrats across the country, people that are running for election in these tough races, viewing events like tonight's?
I think that people who are running in these races are totally focused on their race. If you look at what they're communicating to the voters, whether that's through paid or earned media, there's almost no discussion of the president or most things sort of national. So I think on some level it's a little bit irrelevant. I think it would be helpful to have more of a discussion of the economy coming out of the White House, but it's not something that people are focused on anyway when they're working on their races.
Well, what kind of discussion do you want coming out of the White House? I mean, the president talked about it in the Rose Garden, where we know he's going to talk a little bit about it tonight. Is that enough, or do you want him to just, what specifically?
Well, one of the things that we have not talked about enough here is that if you look at the Republican brand and Republican ideas, the Republican brand is still low. It's not as high as it was in 1994, for example, with the contract with America. And if you look at some of the ideas, if you look at Boehner's speech on the economy, the only concrete idea out of there was free trade. If you look at Paul Ryan's alternative, roadmap, whether it's vouchers for Medicare or privatization of Social Security, there's a whole lot of extremely unpopular Republican ideas. And so I think we should have a more robust conversation about what the choice is about. And I'm more interested in having that conversation than one about going back to Bush, for example. And I think when you put the choices, if we're able to communicate in a real way about these choices, I actually think, again, it's not going to be a great year for us, but we could mitigate some of the wave.
Well, Glenn, one of the things that Democrats talk about, they say that this is not similar to 1994, is that Republicans were in charge fairly recently, and people have those memories, and they know generally what Republicans did before. And Democrats making the argument very starkly that this would be a return to failed policy of the past. How do Republicans overcome that? Do you have to put more messaging on the table?
Voters are looking, like they did in 1994, for a check and balance on one-party control. And voters around the country recognize that President Obama is going to be in for at least another 2 years. So I think it's much harder for the Democrats to say this is a choice election. It really is a referendum on, do you want unfettered one-party control of Washington, or do you want a check and balance? The check and balance worked very, very well, by the way, for the last 6 years of the Clinton administration. It worked for both President Clinton and for congressional Republicans. And I think voters might look back at that and say, okay, that model worked a lot better than when we've had one-party control.
It was a different Republican Party back then. Lost a lot of the moderates. You've got the ascendancy of sort of the Tea Party, which in some ways is almost a rebrand of the Republican. It is a Republican movement. It is not separate from the Republican Party, and so I think you have a different. I think it'll be a very adversaurial 2 years. Let's just put it that way.
That's not what Democrats were saying with Gingrich. Newt Gingrich's speaker and all these, 1994 Republicans who came in, and you heard that from the Democrats how bad these people were, and now suddenly, you guys are getting nostalgic for them.
Never thought I'd miss Newt Gingrich, right?
Well, is it a good idea for John Boehner to do as much public speaking as he's doing? I mean, he's clearly out there now doing a lot to sort of try out to be speaker. But as you know, you can put a lot out there that gives people like Anna some ammunition to use against Republican candidates.
His job, and this is what he's doing, is to go around and help campaigns by doing fundraisers and raising money. And yes, it's going to generate some press coverage. And in general, that's good because the Democrats do control the megaphone. You know, they've got the White House, they've got the Speaker, they've got the Majority Leader in the Senate. So it's harder for us to get our message out. So anything that he can do to get that message out is important.
You can personalize it.
But if you look at the difference between the contract with America and the sorts of Republican ideas that are being advocated now, the contract with America was poll tested, everything in it was extremely popular. If you look at decontextualize, and I get that the context matters a lot, but if you decontextualize it and look at these policies, they're extremely unpopular.
Well,
and that's a critical difference.
We'll see the big poll in November, as always. 2 months away. All right, Anna Greenberg and Glen Bolger, thank you guys for being here, our dueling strategists. Really
Thanks,
appreciate it.
guys.